Hey guys, so I want to make a video going over Deadeye and both Lantern Arrow / Lantern Rod, like a whole video going over the nerfs involved, how good this build is still going to be next patch. Of course, I will update my guide because, yeah, spoiler, the build is still extremely strong and it's definitely still going to be one of the best builds you can play next patch. Now, of course, I min-maxed this character to the max, so I had, Mirror Tier Bow, GG Gloves, GG Boots, everything was min-maxed to the absolute max in this character. I had 195% movement speed. So yeah, how is this character going to be in the next patch? Well, at this level of investment, it doesn't matter. You'll still one-shot all content in the game. At low levels of investment, you will lose some single target damage, but it's still overall going to be extremely strong. So let me go over all the changes so you understand everything. So let's go over the Deadeye Changes first. Tailwind now grants 1% increased movement speed, so same as before. This has not changed. A 2% increased skill speed from 3%, 10% increased evasion from 15%, but it will now prevent 1% of damage from deflected hits per stack. At 10 stacks, this is effectively 16% DR because base deflection value is 40%. Now, this won't always be 16% DR because, you can't reach 100% deflect in the game. Overall, I think this is like a fine adjustment. It's not entirely a nerf because you do get this extra deflect DR instead of the skill speed and evasion. And honestly, the skill speed's not a big deal. The most important thing is movement speed, and that is not touched whatsoever. So yeah, more or less, Tailwind is pretty much just as strong as it was last patch. Yeah, you lose a little bit of damage. 10% skill speed is 10% attack speed. It's not that big of a deal. And the evasion loss is more than made up for the fact that you now get more deflected damage. So yeah, I think overall, it's a fine change. Nothing really changes here. But I think one important thing to note here is that Tailwind is actually getting a massive hidden buff. And why is that? Well, as we know, maps next patch are going to have 40% less pack size. So if your maps have 40% less monsters, you walk into a pack of 10 monsters, it's not going to be a pack of 6. That means there's 40% less chance of being hit next patch. And as you know, Tailwind goes away when you get hit. That means Tailwind next patch is going to have a greatly higher uptime. I think this is something a lot of people did, really miss with this change. It's a very hidden Tailwind buff, but your Tailwind uptime next patch is actually going to be greater than it was this patch. So despite the nerfs, I think overall Tailwind is probably equally as good this patch as it was last patch. Now, this is the biggest nerf by far, is the fact that Wind Ward is removed. If you don't know what Wind Ward is, it's the 3% less damage taken per Tailwind. This gave you 30% DR. Obviously, some of that is made up for the fact that you get 16% DR from the deflected hits. But yeah, honestly, this is definitely the biggest nerf. Deadeye was extremely tanky. And now without this node, it's probably the same techniques as like every other ascendancy, so it's not special in that category anymore. But they did get a new ascendancy node that does look pretty strong. So they are getting Mirage Archer ascendancy node. So this is actually already in the game, but there is one key difference here. So yeah, this did come in last patch. No one really used it, and a big reason why is that while active, only a dodge roll will activate Mirage Archer. The key difference here is that the Deadeye Ascendancy node, one, it's free, so it won't cost Spirit, but it will cost Ascendancy points, and two, it activates on attacking, meaning it can be used on the Rhoa mount. This one could not be used on the Rhoa mount because you can only activate it while dodge rolling. So I think this one does have a lot more potential than the Spirit skill gem. I think it will be a lot more valuable and can also add a lot of damage to your build. This is something definitely to test out next patch. It might be pretty good. We'll have to wait and see. And Bullseye is now behind Cult Shots, so you need to get Cult Shots into Bullseye, which honestly I think is actually more so a nerf. But they did make the critical weakness apply 10 instead of 5, but you now have to go to Cult Shots to actually take this. But anyway, I think what you are just going to take is just Far Shot or Point Blank, +1 Proj, Gather Wins, the new Mirage Archer node. I never liked Call Shots last league. It was pretty mediocre, and the frenzy node is only useful if you're a frenzy based build. Yeah, overall, I think Deadeye, the big nerf here is really just the defense when we're being removed. I think Tailwind is more or less as good as it was last patch, because like I said, the uptime of Tailwind is going to be greater this patch because maps have 40% less monsters, meaning you're going to get hit 40% less often, giving you a much greater Tailwind uptime. Now, as for the big stuff, LA and Rhoa Changes. How good is Lantern Arrow in the next patch? How good is Lantern Rod? Well, actually, Lantern Arrow got buffed for clear, which is kind of funny. The reason for this is that they just buffed the base conversion of Lantern Arrow from 40% to 80%. It's a slight buff, but you will definitely notice it. So yeah, this is just a strict buff. The only thing that got nerfed was Lantern Rod itself. So two things with Lantern Rod. One is that the max stack limit is now 10. Before it was 20. So obviously now you can't preload as much. And the second change is that Lightning Arrow can only activate a Lightning Rod every 0.1 second, meaning at maximum efficiency, if you could achieve it, you could proc 100 rods per second. And also, if you could achieve 100 rods per second, that is absolutely ludicrous damage. So yeah, it's still extremely strong. In comparison, a normal lightning skill like Orbital Storms or Ball Lightning is only a 1 second activation. So yeah, Lightning Arrow is still the vastly superior way to proc this because it's every 0.1 seconds. So what does this actually mean in practice for Lightning Arrow, Lightning Rod? Essentially, what this means is that the only way to really deal damage is that you place your Lightning Rod and then Lightning Arrow, and then stuff like Tornado Shot or stuff like Barrage won't really contribute to the damage anymore. They're pretty much just nerfing these two skills and not Lightning Arrow and Lightning Rod, if that makes sense. Because if you use Tornado Shot and Lightning Rods, you're also going to proc more than 10 rods per second, which is just not going to happen anymore because it has a limit rate of 0.1 seconds. So yeah, if this makes sense, essentially the base combo of Lightning Arrow and Lightning Rod is exactly the same as it was last patch in terms of DPS per second, but the DPS that Tornado Shot added and the DPS that Barrage added is being nerfed. They just actually just really won't even work next patch. So it is quite a big single target nerf. You probably lose it around 3 to 4 times damage. But keep in mind, last patch, day 1, I was doing like 6 million DPS. So if I'm doing like 2 million DPS day 1 instead now, 1.5 million day 1 DPS, it's obviously still an extremely strong skill. So yeah, I do think Lightning Arrow, Lightning Rod, while it is nerfed, it's still extremely strong. A lot of builds don't even reach 1 or 2 million DPS, and this build on the high end is still going to reach over 10 million DPS, meaning it's still going to be one of the best builds in the entire game. And you also have to press less buttons, so maybe that's good for some people. Next is the bow changes. So the Gemini bow is going from +1 arrow to 50% surpass chance. Surpass chance is a new keyword in the next patch. And essentially, every 100% surpass chance equals +1 arrow. Obviously, this is just a big nerf to the Gemini bow base, but for compensation, they're adding 2 surpass wheels onto the skill tree. We don't know how good these are, and this is definitely a big make or break, especially for early game where you really need those plus arrows. Maybe both wheels add up to 200% surpass chance and you get plus arrows in the skill tree. That's probably pretty, actual hopium. But I expect at the bare minimum, if you take both surpass wheels, you probably at least get 100% surpass chance. So like 6-7 point investment for +1 arrow does sound pretty good to me. This +1 arrow early on is extremely valuable. And more importantly, if you get this +1 arrow from your skill tree, then you get +1 arrow from your ascendancy and you place +1 arrow. This would allow you to open up to different bows. That means you could use something like a Warmonger bow early on, which is just way more base damage. So yeah, while the Gemini change itself is a nerf, adding additional ways to get +1 arrow on the skill tree is a massive buff, right? That is just something we just didn't have before, and now we do. In terms of the bow itself, bows can still get +2 arrows. It's just called 200% surpass chance instead. So yeah, as for the suffix modifier, it's exactly the same as before. The only thing that's being changed is the Gemini bow is going to 50% from 100%. And one nerf here that doesn't matter all that much in the end game, just for leveling, but I will mention it, is that they are nerfing these small companion nodes. You will only get one of these effects now. We don't know what else got changed with this, but yeah, it might only be 12% increased damage now. Doesn't really matter in the end game because in the end game you didn't take these nodes, so mostly just for like leveling and mid game before you won crit. So I guess it will be a slight nerf to leveling. But bow leveling was extremely good last patch, so a slight nerf is honestly not that big of a deal. And I guess also on a leveling real quick, the leveling for Lightning Arrow and Lightning Rod is more or less exactly the same as before. I did a quick test run today using only 10 max stack limits, not using Barrage, and you don't even get Tornado Shot until like the NF Act 4. So yeah, pretty much the leveling for this build is more or less exactly the same. You're just going to be losing a little bit of damage by not taking these companion damage nodes. And as the last change, which is definitely a big one considering the nerfs they done to other things, is that Rhoa did lose 15% MS, but it gained 20% MS penalty reduction while moving. And this is pretty big because in the next patch, this is going to be the only way to achieve 100% reduction because they are massively reducing and just removing sources of reduced move speed penalty from using skills. People last league, they played crossbows with like 100% of this reduction, sparks, spears, whatever, right? That is no longer doable in the next patch. The only way to achieve 100% reduction is by going on a Rhoa. So that does make Rhoa way better this patch comparatively to what it was last patch, which kind of puts builds that can use Rhoa like spears and bows like one step above those builds that can't use Rhoa. Stuff like spark from last patch or crossbows. Those builds are going to be capped at like probably 50 or 60% movement penalty reduction, which is still good, but obviously it's not as good as 100%. and 100% just feels so good, where you just shoot while moving and you just don't lose any movement speed whatsoever. It feels extremely good. You know, if you played with Rhoa, yeah, you know how good it feels. The one caveat here is that Pathfinder, obviously in the next patch, is extremely strong. The Pathfinder changes, you know, TLDR, I went over in 2 videos already though, but you cannot be knocked down while sprinting with a newborn assault, and you still get the 50% less movement speed penalty, which is, you know, half as good as Rhoa, which is still pretty good. And of course, there's also ways to get a lot of sprint movement speed next patch. But you're a ranger, right? So if you did want to play Deadeye, LA Deadeye, whatever, you can still always swap to Pathfinder, which is going to be a really new insane and sensing next patch. And it's kind of like a hidden ranger buff, right? Before Pathfinder, not a lot of people really played it. You kind of just played a ranger, just play Deadeye. But next patch, if you choose to play Deadeye, you're going to really have 2 insane ascendancies to do a lot of stuff on. So you can like league start as, you know, LA Deadeye, then maybe you can transition to Pathfinder and do anything you want on Pathfinder. You can play Pathfinder spells, Pathfinder melee slams, Pathfinder, you know, like Druid shapeshifting, right? Because Pathfinder can start from any base starting location, as in Sorc, Ranger, or Warrior. So yeah, Pathfinder is kind of like a hidden buff to Ranger, because now you have this alternative endgame option to swap to if you want to play a different build, or just abuse Pathfinder with the whole, like, you know, bonus move speed sprint and all that. So yeah, that's about it for, you know, the whole LA Deadeye, the TLDR of what happened to this build. More or less, it's still extremely strong, and I would say easily, at least as far as I can see right now, at least for a league starter, it's still easily a top 3 build, still an S tier build if you want to play it. Personally, for me, I'm unsure if I want to play it till next patch. I might play Bows, I might play Jude. I'm not really sure. I'm kind of tentative on playing Jude, because I don't expect Jude to have any move speed whatsoever, so it might be a bit slow, which does worry me for actual, you know, end game viability farming. But yeah, that's mostly about it for video. If you want to play LA Deadeye, I will have the guides updated before launch. It's still extremely strong, and I still highly recommend it. I will have a video coming out with an updated guide, whether or not I'm playing it, because yeah, overall the build is still pretty much the same. The only thing that's really changing is the fact that you just cannot use Tornado Shot and Barrage anymore for a single target. That is it. Everything else is completely the same. Your clear is just as good as it was last patch. Obviously, you do lose some defense with the Wind Ward nerf, so this will make you a little bit squishier in the early game, but end game is still going to be fine. But yeah, that's about it.